So I haven't done a live coding in a while, so I'm going to try to just add a feature and just code it live and try to do as little edits to this video as possible. For the starter kit I've been talking about in marketing, I want to have a realistic application that has like role-based authorization. It has teams, so you can kind of like invite people to teams, etc. And I haven't really created anything yet. And it's going to be basically a group invite system where you can create a group, such as like, let's say you like to code in JavaScript, you can make a JavaScript coding group and you can invite people. Or you like soccer, you can create a soccer group and invite people. So the first thing I need to do is make an endpoint called groups/create. And I do think I already have a really basic starting point for there. So create group. And what I want to do is I want to give the user the ability to enter in some information to a form and submit that with a server action. Let's go to our create group page and let's just keep this as simple as possible for right now. Let's make a form and let's see how far I can get with just using a server action. So the first thing we need to do is we need to make a form. Let's give it like an input here. I could have a name of, just name. And then, why does I have a label there? And then also we could do another input for like description, okay? And then also, I think I have like a loading button or a form button, submit button. Let's see, submit button. Let me look at what the submit button does. It has a use form status. So by default, this is going to show a loader when the form is submitting. So that's what we want. I do think it takes in some children. So let's just go ahead and add in some children here. I can call that create group. And also, we should probably add some labels to this. So let's go ahead and import the label from my components directory. All right, and we'll say name. Do an HTML4 name. We'll give an ID to this and say name. Save it. Go down here. We'll add one for description. Description, and yeah, do this. Sometimes coding is very tedious, but we're just going to go ahead and try to create this form. Get rid of the action for right now. So let's make sure this actually loads. Let's go back to our form. Here we have it. The page looks pretty bad. So let's go back to here, and typically the layout would have some type of container so that all your stuff would be wrapped in a container. So let's see if I actually have a container here. If you go to layout, this is just rendering some children. And sometimes I like to give the flexibility of how the actual individual page looks to the subroutes, because I've seen issues where like you put a container, but then on some pages you want it to be like full screen, but whatever. I'm just going to go here. I'm going to say class name, and then I'll say container MX auto, and that should at least pull that stuff in because every page will be in its own container. And then I like to add just padding Y of 12 so that it brings the content in from the top and the bottom. You could additionally, if you want to, you could say min H screen, and that'll kind of make it full screen. Okay. Which looks really bad now, but I mean, as you add more content to this, it'll look pretty good. Anyway, we can come back and refactor this if this isn't going to work for our needs. So let's go back to the page that we're working on. We need to style these inputs a little bit because right now they don't look too good. And also this, you give it like a text of 4x, font bold maybe. Save that. Let's see if that makes it look a little bit nicer. Here we go, create group. And then for the label itself, I don't know, text of extra large maybe, and margin bottom 2. Okay. Now, sometimes I like to wrap these things. I could probably have like a form group component, so it has some like pre-baked styling. So wrap these things, and then on the form itself, I can say class name flex. Actually, I can say space Y of 4, and that'll space these things out. Okay, so these things have like 4 spacing. I don't know if the 4 is enough. Let's try an 8. See what an 8 does. Okay, that looks a little bit better. And then, of course, under here, we can do the same thing. Class name space Y. I'll give it like an 8 again. Maybe I'll make this a 6 so they're a little bit closer. Okay. And then for the labels, probably add a little bit of spacing onto that. So again, this is like the form group wrapper that we're adding. And I could say space Y of, we'll do like a 3. How about that? We'll pick an odd number, make it strange. All right, so this looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and add a description here. And am I missing anything? I think it should be good. Now these things are going to be required, okay? So let's go ahead and just on the input itself, here and here, we'll say required. I'll use HTML5 validation for right now to keep it simple. So when I submit this, it'll say, please fill out this form. It says it over here as well. But there is one thing that I've been doing in the starter kit, which is when this form is submitted, I want to call a server action. Let's go over to my actions file, and this is kind of where I'm putting like all my server actions that are co-located for a particular route. So let's just go ahead and make a server action. I'm going to say const create group action. I like adding a suffix to my actions so that it's easier when I'm reading through my code base. That's just my personal opinion. Let's also export it. I'm going to go ahead and say safe. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and call this action function. So I'm using a library called libsafeaction, which allows me to create actions that are already validated with Zod. Okay, so it's very useful. And basically, I can make a schema here, and I can bring in Zod, and I can say this is going to be an object, and the object needs to have a name, string. We'll say min of 1, and then also a description. There we go. So now the way this safe action works is you pass it your schema, and then you pass it your asynchronous server action. We just have it do a console log right now. Let's say hello world, maybe. And the action itself, you can bring it in to your page. I'm going to pass it here. I'm going to say action, and I want to call that action. You know, now that I think about it, I'd rather just make this form live in its own component. I'll just go here and I'll make like I'll call it a create group form tsx, and I'm going to go ahead and just export this function, create group form. There's so many different ways you could potentially make a form in Next.js. Like if you're using server actions with like React server components, it works fine until you have to like show validation errors, and then it's like a pain because now you have to use form state, and then you have to like add that to your action. It just adds, in my opinion, more complexity. Now the issue with the submit button is I can't use the submit button. So instead I need to say on submit, go ahead and just call a function when this form gets submitted. We'll do E. And then in our case, we could say const form data. Our form is equal to e.target as HTML form element. Form data is equal to get the form data. And then I'm going to go ahead and get the name and the description. And then we're going to pass those to here. Now with my next safe actions, you can actually go over here and say like const execute is equal to use action. So this is a hook that's provided with next safe action. Just go ahead and pass it your action here like this. And I can call execute, and that is going to basically pass in that data from the form to my server action. If it fails, I can react to the error. So for example, over here, I could say result, and I could also say status. So down at the bottom, I'm gonna go ahead and say loading button, loader button, and I'm gonna change that from a submit button. And then we're gonna say is loading is equal to status is equal to executing. Okay. And again, the reason I'm doing this is like this utility function just makes it nicer to have actions that are protected. You always want to make sure your actions do some type of Zod validation so that people don't send in whatever data they want. You want to validate this stuff. So now what we can do is if the thing failed, we can go ahead and in the action itself, like this should print out hello world unless we pass in some bad data. So down at the bottom, I can just go ahead and say like if status is equal to as errored, we're gonna go ahead and just print out a message that says like something wrong happened. Result dot data dot. Go ahead and render this out and see what it looks like. Okay, so hopefully this is gonna work fine. But let's test it out. Actually, let's go back to the page. What's the page complaining about? Oh yeah, now I have an actual form, so I need to say create group form, delete all that, and go ahead and just move out some of that code. All right, all that work to make a freaking form. So now if I submit this, the backend should fail. Oh, I forgot to prevent default, e.prevent default. Awesome. So let's go ahead and try running it again. The backend should have thrown an exception, and we should have seen something pop up. Actually, I think what I'm looking for is result.server error. Let's do that, and let's see what pops up over there. Okay, so now if I do this and submit it, of course nothing pops up. Oh, okay, I'm an idiot. So it's looking for validation errors. So it tells you what's wrong. So like validation errors, name String must contain at least one character. So, you know, let's just go underneath here. I'm going to do a span, and then we're going to go ahead and say if this result.validation errors, and then we will look for name. If this exists, then let's just go ahead and print out whatever that validation error was. And technically, I don't need to do these brackets. Don't know why I'm doing that. Go ahead and do that, and then we'll print out what the validation error was, which I don't know what that is. Just save that. String must contain at least one characters. Okay, here we go. Now you can also use form hook, and like that will make your life a little bit easier too. But you still have to validate the action somewhere. So let's just try to style this a little bit. Just say text red of 400, and then I'm gonna do a hacky margin top too. Okay, let's make sure this looks good. Okay, here we go. I think we're cooking now. Let's go ahead and grab this, and I'll put this one as well underneath here, and we'll say this is description. And if anything's wrong with the description, we'll get rid of the other one too. Yeah. So now, if I don't want this like HTML5 validation, I can get rid of that. Go ahead and submit this. And there we go. String must contain at least one character. Do that. Awesome. So like you see, I don't know what the heck I'm doing, but I think we got it working. So the idea is when someone submits this data, the safe action allows us to get the name in the description already. It's already typed. We have the type safety here, and we can use that to insert it into a database. So let's go down to, I have like a data access and a use case. I like to kind of split my stuff up with use cases, as you might have seen in some other code bases. Let's make a new one. We're going to call this groups.ts. And I think additionally, if I go to my schema file, we need to add a groups table. So by the way, my starter kit, I'm trying to add like nice descriptive comments in all my code in case like you're reading through it, trying to understand what's going on. So let's just make a quick table called groups, and that's going to have a name and then also a description. I don't know why I have uniques on that. Okay, there we go. And we've added something to our schema. I'm using Drizzle for the starter kit. And so what I want to do is I want to go to another terminal, and I'm going to go ahead and run a generate command. So this is going to compare my schema against my SQLite instance that's running locally, and it's going to generate a SQL file, right? So it's basically saying create a new table that has ID, name, and description, has these properties, and then that's about it. It's also going to drop a GitHub column from a user table. That should be fine. So when we have that, I can go over here and just run like a migrate, and that should apply those changes to my database. Awesome, no errors, we should be good. And let's go and double check Drizzle Studio. I'm going to refresh this and notice that group shows up here. Very good. And our second migration script just ran. And let's go back to this group's use case. So the way I structure my code is I have use cases that kind of encapsulates the business logic. And then those call into persistence methods. So let's look over here. Do we have like a create anywhere? I have an add, update, users. Okay. Whatever. Let's just grab one of these. And we're going to go back to our groups use case. And I'm going to make one called create group use case. And this is going to need to take in an authenticated user. So let's go ahead and take that in. And then we're going to take in a group. I'll call it new group. And I'll say this has a name, which is a string, and a description, which is a string. And we're going to assume that before the use case is invoked, the action did some type of authentication checks. But if everything is good, we can go ahead and just call it create group, and we'll pass it the new group data. And so I also have a data access layer. Go over here and make one called groups. And I'm going to go ahead and say export function create group. Technically, this will be async. And this is going to take in a group, which technically what I could do, if I go to my schema file down at the bottom, this is where like different exports are, different types are being exported. So I can go ahead and say like groups.first select so that I can use that group over here like this, go ahead and import it. And then I'm also going to omit the ID because we don't know what the ID is before the group is created. So now like To call this persistence method, you have to have some group data, and then we're going to go ahead and get the database. We're going to say insert into the groups table, and then we're going to say values of group. All right, so now we have a persistence method which should insert this group into our table. I have a use case that should be invoking it, and we have an authenticated user. Technically, we don't even need that authenticated user at this point. And you might ask, like, why am I doing this like weird layered approach? It just makes the code cleaner, because what if you create a group and you want to send off a bunch of emails later on? Well, you have this function that encapsulates all your business logic, and you can do additional things like send off notifications. You could potentially send off emails. You can modify other places in your system. All right, this is all business logic, and you want to make sure you have a place to kind of write all that in. So if you just do this whole use cases approach that calls in data access methods to do what it needs to do, in my opinion, it makes the code a little bit easier. So now that I think about it, we actually do need the authenticated user, because we don't know who this group would belong to. If someone creates this group, we need to track who is the user who created it, right? So let's just go ahead and make sure that we have a user ID reference. I think you can do like references. Let's see how we did it over here. Just looks like this. Go ahead and put that right below here. And now, unfortunately, we got to do the whole schema thing again. So I'm going to generate a schema. Okay, and then I'm going to migrate so that we can apply that. And unfortunately, I think I have a SQL error. Okay, so it turns out that this generated SQL, it's not perfect, but I had to add these double quotes, these quotes to get this to run. So now my database is updated, and I should be able to hopefully add a user ID. So now when new group comes in, we want to take the authenticated user, and we want to add a user ID to it, and we have that right here. So let's go ahead and make sure that we pass that in the use case to the persistence method, and that should save properly. Let's go back to the action, and I'm going to await. I'm going to say const session is equal to await get SSR session, and then that should give us the user. If we don't have a session defined, we're going to throw a action error. This, and then I'm going to go ahead and say await create group use case. Like this, we're going to pass it the session user, and then also we're going to pass it that information about the name and the description. Okay. And hopefully, after I run this, we should probably just revalidate or redirect back to a different page. So I'm just going to redirect back to the dashboard for now. Let's try this out and see what happens. So going back to our UI, I'm going to go ahead and just say testing and hello world. To create the group, redirecting me back to the dashboard, refresh my groups. It shows up. I have a group that's associated with that user ID over here. So if I go click on user, we see that, oh, there we go. I had to refresh the entire thing. So now the user ID comes in, and you can see that that's attached to this user, right? But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed watching this little feature add to my starter kit. If you did, give me a thumbs up. Like always, can be found at wdcstarterkit.com. The description will be below. Go ahead and sign up for my newsletter. I'll send out some updates, and I'll also send you out an email when it's live. And if you guys want to purchase it, you guys can do that and join my. Also, I'm going to have a private Discord channel for this starter kit where I'm going to help people out along the way, and we can talk about building out SaaS products together, stuff like that. I think it'd be a good experience. So definitely be on the lookout for that. Other than that, have a good day. Happy coding.